You better unmute and start again.
Here we go. Here we go. Well, it's good to have everyone here this afternoon, and in Fran's case, this evening. And we want to welcome you to the webinar today. The webinar today explores the role of leadership in building and leading effective teams. And we're delighted to have Fran Beckett with us as our presenter. Fran has a rich history in the area of leadership and experience. She has experience as a CEO of two national not-for-profit organizations, chairing various national boards and also government advisory groups in the UK. Fran is a speaker, a writer, and trainer in the areas of missional community action and leadership development. Also, Fran is very active in her local community. She's involved as a community activist and is a committed inner city dweller. And in her spare time, I can't imagine Fran has spare time, but she has pioneered with others an emerging church that is now 12 years old, and although she has no
Thank
longer.
you very much indeed. I'm hoping you can all hear me all right. I had a bit of a muddle around the timing here, so I thought it was an hour earlier than it actually was. So it's great to be with you all, wherever you're listening. I'm going to be talking with you and exploring with you, and hopefully we'll have opportunity for not just for questions, but from comments from you as well. I'm going to be talking with you about leading effective teams. And I wanted to start, first of all, with looking at what do we mean by team. And I guess very different things shape our view of team, not least our good and our bad experiences of it, but also where we've seen other teams working, whether that's in the sporting world or the church world or in organizations or church. And there's a quote that says that no one can whistle a symphony, it takes an orchestra to do it. And the value of teams is not to be underestimated. I guess when we're talking about teams, we're talking about numbers of people who are probably not more than 12 people and not fewer than 3. But sometimes we find we're ending up leading teams that are much larger than that, and that brings its own issues. But what characterizes a team is that this measure of interdependence between the members and the accountability to one another for the work that is actually done together. It's not just about who someone reports to or not, it's about the interactions with peers in that team. And it's also obviously you coming together for a particular purpose, sharing a common goal, whether that's one big overarching goal with a lot of different objectives under that. But there has to be that commonality that actually gives one an identity as a team, which is that common goal. I guess maybe one of the other characteristics of a team is this thing of people share the rewards and responsibilities. We share the responsibilities among each other, but also when things go well, we can celebrate together and share the rewards of that. And what characterizes team membership, I think, is very much a team is where members readily put aside their individual needs and personal needs for the greater good of the group or indeed the cause. Now, I think it would be good to look particularly at what does an effective team look like. And when we come to looking at effective teams, it's very interesting because obviously everybody, as I've said already, has their own individual views, and sometimes those are positive and sometimes they're negative. So when we gather a group of people around us to be in a team, one of the key things to do very early on is to build a shared view of what a team actually is. What is a team in this setting for this purpose? What sort of team are we? What do we exist for? what do we want to achieve, but also how we're going to function, what behaviours, what values. And within that, the importance of context. Teams are formed for different purposes, and what sort of team does a situation require? It may just be something that's a very short-term thing, and therefore, possibly in that setting, we may find ourselves far more task-centred than relationship-centred. So what's the lifespan of the team, and what qualities and skills are needed in order for that team to function? I, as was already said, have worked quite a bit in large national organisations, and I went a few years ago. I moved from a large national organisation to a much smaller national organisation that was in decline, and it was the whole thing about how do you turn this around. And I inherited a team that were very demoralised, that actually many of them didn't really have the skills that were needed for taking the organisation forward. And generally, it was quite a difficult situation, and people were feeling bad about it. And I had to work through with them, well, what is the team that we need going forward? And what contributions can you make? What's the context for that? Now, as well as the importance of context, I think we get a lot of hints from the Bible in terms of what an effective team is. I love the doctrine of the Trinity, where you have community right at the heart of the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I know there have been tomes of books written on the Trinity, but what we have there is perfect team. We have the individual members of the Godhead with their own individual core functions, and yet that oneness and that, if you like, pulling together in the same direction with that overarching purpose of God's big story of mission in the world, not just today, but right through time and eternity. So I think the Trinity gives us some hints. I think sometimes people talk about the Trinity, the interaction between the members of the Trinity as dance, and that movement, and that being there for one another, and that just the flow between the three members, and yet the distinctiveness. So I think the Trinity gives us some hints about the ideal or effective team, if you like, that interdependence and unity, yet not necessarily uniformity. Paul's appeal and prayer to many of the New Testament churches was about agreeing together, about being one in heart and mind, but having, yes, a shared commitment, but not necessarily having to think the same way. A shared commitment to the common goal and reaching that common agreement on the way forward, even though people would have their differences. And of course, when we think about team, there's always Jesus and his disciples and how he engaged with them and led them. And one of the things that always stands out to me from Jesus' example is that he created a learning environment for his team. Time and again, he asked them very searching questions, try and help them understand the context in which they were working, try and help them understand what it was they were actually trying to achieve. So briefly, just as an overview, and then we're going to go into more depth, what are some of the core characteristics of an effective team? I would like to suggest that there's a sense of shared purpose. We know what we want to do, and we're for one another and supporting one another in actually achieving it. An effective team is a team where a team plays to the strengths of the individuals. We've all got different strengths, and we've also got certain frailties, haven't we? And I've been involved in teams where actually the team leader in particular has not been very effective at drawing out the strengths of people, seems more preoccupied often with the frailties and weaknesses. And actually, if we can help one another identify one another's strengths and really play to those and watch one another's backs and cover for one another in a supportive way when we have frailties, that means we'll be far more effective, and actually it'll be much more enjoyable. An effective team is an adaptable team. Situations change, people's issues change, the needs of the situation change, and if we stick in, well, we do it this way, and we've always done it that way, and we don't adapt to the environment in which we find ourselves, or to adapt and adjust to one another's strengths, then I think we're going to have problems. Not only that, it's about resilience. We live in a turbulent world, a world where think, as I said, things change, where there's a measure of unpredictability that makes it quite difficult sometimes to always be clear about what's coming around the corner. Certainly big corporates seem to be moving away from the 5 and 10-year plans that they used to have. I was in a meeting yesterday with a large national social housing organisation. I chair their board, and we were talking about, well, we have a plan up until 2020, but it's only in headlines. Actually, we have business plans for just for a year now because we find the situation in which we're working is so volatile. So that whole thing of adaptability and also resilience in terms of going with the changes that are necessary so often. An effective team is a team, I think, that laughs together, that has fun together, not laughing at one another, but laugh with one another. And maybe this is something we want to talk about further when we talk about vulnerability for team members and team leaders. Maybe we need to learn to cry together as well. This whole thing of bearing one another's burdens. And within that, and I think in our churches we're not very good at this sometimes. An effective team is a team where we can learn from our mistakes, where we own our mistakes, or we own things that don't go well, or we own and admit and acknowledge not just mistakes, but maybe disappointments as well. And from that, seek to learn, rather than just having a misery day, but actually seek and think, what's the learning in this situation going forward? So actually, an effective team is one that has a learning culture. Now, I'm going to move on and get us to look a little bit at some effective team leadership. Now, I would like to suggest that effective team leadership is not just about skills, those skills are important. It's actually about attitudes, qualities that we have, and our behaviours. Some of you may have come across a book published in 2009 by Jimmy Long, IVP, I think published it, called The Leadership Jump. And he talked about the need in our increasingly postmodern society for some changes, some shifts in the way that we exercise leadership. And I'm picking some of those just as headlines, really. I've reflected my own insights and comments on them, but I'm going to take us through a few of them. One of them is the heroic, the post-heroic, from the guarded leader to the vulnerable leader, a shift from having authority because of our position or our job title or our role or the church pastor to authority that is earned, a shift from focusing just on the task to actually the building of community, the relational end of it. The shift, which I think can be quite challenging, I often find it challenging, the one of moving from directing things, organising things oneself, directing how they should go, to actually empowering others to take responsibility. And actually, this final one I've listed here is this one of being focused not just on the destination, in other words, where we want to get to with a particular task or goal for the team, but actually the journey that we take being just as important. And I'm going to start by looking at heroic to post-heroic. I forgot to say actually earlier, an effective team is a team that actually gets the job done. Very, very important. And we can be so focused on team building and all the rest of it that sometimes we forget there's actually a job to do. But coming on to the heroic to post-heroic, I'll cover this one a bit and then the next one, and then maybe we could stop for some questions and comments. Post-heroic is, or heroic to post-heroic, is really much about, instead of having to be the main person, the one who does everything, who's the individual, who's assertive, who's dominant, but being the one who delivers, not just by doing it oneself, but actually sharing the responsibility with others, and actually someone who invites the sharing of power. Now, that sounds great in theory, not always easy to do in practice. And the heroic to the post-heroic is where the team leader actually puts energy and effort into building community, the connecting people one with another. instead of having to be the one that everybody has to go through. I think, particularly in our churches, many of us have been brought up in church backgrounds, let alone in corporates or organisation backgrounds, where the CEO or the pastor, they're the head figure, and what they say goes, and everything has to go through them. The Lone Ranger sort of approach. And what I would like to suggest that if we want to build effective teams, we actually need to be someone who moves from having to control everything to releasing people to discover their gifts, to take responsibility, to participate in and share in the task of leading and taking responsibility for the way forward. And the team leader's job is not so much about controlling everything, but more about creating an environment so that people can flourish. I don't know if many of my listeners are into jazz. I love jazz personally, and it's about helping a team flourish in such a way that it's like a jazz group playing a sort of free flow, jamming together, where the lead is transferred with ease from one musician to another, if you like. And why? For the sake of the music. And it's that sort of image of team that I think is really an exciting one that is really relevant to the world in which we live today. Now, at the end of each of these transitions that I'm talking about, I'm going to just highlight a few pressure points and struggles. And for some people, they like security. They don't actually want to take responsibility. They want a team leader who will tell them what to do and when to do it and how to do it. They like things to be predictable. And it's important for us to understand our people and to work with them with the grain of who they are, right, rather than trying to push them into something overnight that actually won't work for them. The problem with many of our teams is that for those of us who are pioneers, our very nature can be that of wanting to forge ahead, be out front with the wacky ideas, to be the person, because it's just there in our nature. Pioneering means that often we're the one pushing forward. And that can create tensions for us then in trying to share responsibility and indeed empower those that we're with. And I don't know about you, but sometimes leadership, if you're a leader, it can feel risky to trust people to take things on, because actually they might do it differently from the way that we do, or we might have been let down in the past. So none of these things I think are easy, but I think that actually if we can see some of these shifts, we will find that our team life is richer, that it's more enjoyable, and actually we achieve a lot, and we see people grow and flourish and grow into responsibility, and we don't have that heavy burden of all that 100% dependence on us. Let me just cover one more, I think, and then maybe we'll stop for some questions. And let's go. This is the guarded to vulnerable, the transition, the shift, if you like, as a leader, from going from a place of being very guarded to being vulnerable. I here in the UK, particularly amongst younger people, but also increasingly amongst those of my generation, there is a hunger for authenticity. There's a growing cynicism with authority. We see that in terms of the numbers of people that turn out to vote in elections. We see that in terms of surveys about public confidence and trust in authority figures, such as the police, such as politicians, even mistrust of the authority of the church. And that's being replaced, I think, by deepening hunger for authenticity, not for labels, but for authentic people who walk the talk. And many of us as Christians, I think, particularly in leadership, have been taught and have modelled for us that you've got to hold yourself apart a bit. You mustn't show yourself to be vulnerable to those that you lead. You're taught to project calm and always having our act together and having the answers when others need them. Instead, I'd like to suggest that we need to move to a place where we can be comfortably not in control. I have tried, in my experience, to build teams around me of people who actually know more than I do, who have more expertise in certain areas, people who actually have more understanding of certain things than I would have, rather than trying to build around me people that I'm one step ahead of them all the time. I also try to build around me when I'm building teams, people who are very different from myself. Now, I have to admit, and I hope there are no members of teams I've led listening to this, that sometimes I rue the day that I've done that. There are moments when I think, why did I do that? Because everybody has an opinion, and it's can be quite challenging. But actually, it's always been much richer, and as we've learned to work in team, I wouldn't want it to be any other way, if I'm honest. We, as team leaders, I would like to suggest we do need to realise that, as Stephen Covey says, strength lies in differences, not in similarities. The guarded to vulnerable transition means that actually, what response do we make when we make a mistake, when we blow it? I would like to suggest that we need to readily acknowledge our own mistakes. That's really difficult to do. And the temptation is to cover it up, isn't it? Or bluff our way through, or just push it away, or minimize it. Actually, if we can own our mistakes, not in terms of saying how awful we are and go into a pity me sort of situation, but actually saying, yes, I recognise that that was not the best way to do this. I recognise I made a mistake there, or I recognise that didn't turn out as well as we hoped. Let's look together at why that might be and how it can be done differently next time. That takes some humility to do and is not always comfortable, but I would like to suggest that we do explore moving in that direction. That's quite a vulnerable place, as is saying when somebody asks you something, I don't know. Now, if it's a leader, you always don't know, then maybe there is something that we need to work on there. But there will be times when we need to be people that actually own that we don't know, but let's go and find out together. Let's go and find out together. Don't just stop at not knowing, but demonstrate a commitment to learning. And within all of this whole business of moving from being a guarded leader to a vulnerable leader, the thinking around emotional intelligence, whether you're familiar with that phrase or not, it's really about us as people possessing insight into how others tick, into the impact that our words and actions have on other people. So we need to be sensible, we need to be wise in our exercise of vulnerability, and we need to be sensitive to where other people are in that. But we do need to be people, I would like to suggest, if we're going to be effective as team leaders, to be people who actually demonstrate some of the characteristics that indeed Jesus did through the incarnation. He demonstrated, as we read about in Philippians 2, chapter 2, verse 7, it talks about Jesus made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant. It's Simon Walker, a British author on leadership, calls the undefended leader. The undefended leader. It's about actually saying, I'm a human being too, and I won't always get it right. And I have needs, I have issues, but I'm very committed to us moving forward together. And I want us to be a team that actually does learn, that does grow, and that does achieve what we set out to achieve. Now, I put on here this whole thing, moving from being guarded to being vulnerable, living on the edge of chaos. Now, some of us love that. I have to say, I'm one of these people, I quite enjoy a bit of chaos. I like a bit of complexity, a bit of ambiguity, and movement. For other people, that's a very scary thing. And I'm not suggesting that we go looking for chaos, but if we are people that are seeking to empower others, that we're being comfortably not in control, that we're owning our mistakes, that we're seeking to be vulnerable and humble in the way that we serve others as a leader, a lot of creative possibilities exist at those places, in those places, and flourishing can happen in those places. So, I mean, there's an awful lot talked about chaos theory, and there isn't time to look at that here. But all of these transitions mean that sometimes life will not be as certain. It won't be in boxes in the same way. It won't have quite the same sort of safety to it. There's risk in all of this. But at that very place of risk, or if you'd like to describe it as the edge of chaos, at that very place is huge potential. Now, pressure points in this are, as leaders, we will have expectations of ourselves, and others will have expectations of us, and it's quite difficult then to be vulnerable and to say things like, I don't know, or actually I think I've probably made a mistake here. Very difficult to do that. Also risky, in that people may let us down, and that can be a very painful thing. I can think of friends of mine where they were in a church leadership situation, and the leaders there, senior leaders, pushed them and pushed them to make a commitment to stay there long term. And then after they'd made that commitment, 2 years later, they themselves up and left. And that was extremely painful and difficult for these friends of mine who had made themselves vulnerable. They put themselves in a situation where they really trusted these other people and had committed themselves wholeheartedly into what was a very difficult situation. They had been let down, and I think it took them a while to recover from that. And therefore, these things are not necessarily easy. Vulnerability is not easy, but I would say that it needs to be part of the leadership reality. I think I've talked enough. Let's see if we've got any comments, any questions. What do you think, Stan? Have we got anything there?
Got to turn on the mic once again. We have quite a few comments. A lot of people have responded to your metaphor of jazz music, and a number of people have been commenting about that. Basically, they've chimed in on that and have started their own chat with that. Dave, there is one question I want to get to first, and then I'll go up to an earlier question. Dave Smalley has typed in, he said, where did it go? As we speak of these teams, how long is the life of this team? Are we talking until the task is complete, or does the team take on more of a life of its own?
I would be interested to know what others think, but if it's an effective team, one of the byproducts of an effective team is that we actually enjoy being together, and there's a commitment that people make to one another, and therefore, once the task is over, very often the team wants to continue in one way or another, and sometimes it's about finding another way to express that, and of course there are other things that team has to do. But a little later on, I'm going to talk about teams that actually are not just about tasks, but are about community, and suggest that increasingly, because of this hunger for authenticity, because of individualism that we have increasingly in our Western world, that relationships are taking on, and team relationships are taking on so much greater importance. So I think effective teams often do want to continue long beyond the task.
Are you talking about a team then really rising to or achieving a level of trust where they build that sense of community and relationship? It seems like trust is a big factor in that.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know whether you've come across the writings of Lencioni, who talks about the dysfunctions of teams. He talks about the 5 dysfunctions of teams, and he suggests that trust is absolutely the bedrock of effective teams. I think one of the issues for us as Christians in that is that we have in our minds all sorts of things, expectations. I've been with organisations, Christian organisations, where people talk about the organisation as a family, and they therefore have expectations of team that sometimes are inappropriate, or the team becomes their alternative church, and sometimes they put too much onto the team in terms of expecting the team to meet too many of their needs, and therefore trust becomes more than trust in the way that we work together, we understand one another. It becomes much deeper and far more far-reaching than that. which has, I think, all sorts of implications. Not necessarily a bad thing, but if there are differing expectations, then you may well have
Yeah.
problems.
Chris Bowman raised a question earlier in your presentation where you mentioned a bit of your experience, and you said that you inherited a team where some members were unable to do their task. And so he's asking, what did you do about that? And with the follow-up question, do team leaders need to fix that issue before the team can work well together? So if they don't have the
Yes.
skills, or perhaps even the motivation, how do you work with that?
It's never easy, is it? And as Christians, I think we're often a bit bogged down by niceness, and we want to be nice to people, and sometimes we therefore fail to do the more biblical thing, which is speaking of truth in love. And we carry on with situations far too long without seeking to tackle them, and that has a negative effect on other team members. So I think there are several things in that. One is we want people to succeed. We want them to do well. And so there has to be a conversation with the individual concerned about possible reasons for them not doing as well as one would hope. Now, it could be that they don't really understand what it is that's expected of them. It could be that they don't have the skills. If they don't have the skills, do they have the motivation to, and do you have the time in terms of what has to be done, to see if you can get some training for them? But not the training where they just do a course, but actually maybe they can be mentored and find them an external mentor or someone like that who would help them grow in their capacity to do what's needed. Sometimes, unfortunately, as in the situation where I described earlier in this webinar, sometimes you have to help people move on. Now, I don't know what it's like in the USA, but certainly in Britain we have all sorts of employment legislation that can make that a little tricky in terms of how you work that through. But what I would say is, if we're going to help people move on, is to try and help them do that well. It may be volunteers, they may not be employed, but help them do it well, which is actually perhaps try and help them, support them in thinking through what they might do next, helping them identify what their skills are, helping them with a CV, whatever it is. So we help people move on well, but I would really counsel that we don't let the problem keep on too long. Not good for the individual, not good for the team.
There's a question that is raised by Kevin, and he asked, if there is no trust in the team, then should the team be dismantled regardless of accomplishing the task or the charge?
Big question. I would want to ask, why is there no trust in the team? And it takes, again, Lencioni, if I can quote him, he says that it doesn't take so much as time to build trust, it takes courage. It takes courage. And building trust, I mean, there are all sorts of ways in which you can begin to do that. Sometimes it takes me back to my Christian culture thing that we sometimes have in our teams, where we expect everybody automatically to trust one another because we're Christians. We're human beings, actually, and we bring different understandings and experiences to bear and expectations to bear. So building trust, you can start with some very simple exercises which are around like icebreaker exercises in team meetings, which are just to get people to tell each other 3 things that they did as a child that they enjoyed, or 3 things that they 3 workplaces in the past that they've enjoyed, or what is it that gets them out of bed in the morning, or just little bits of self-disclosure that help us begin to understand one another without necessarily having to bare our deepest, darkest secrets. That's not the place to start. Start small and build from there. Affirmation, feedback, very important. Things like assisting people to see where they've actually made a positive contribution, so that they can see that you trust them. And as team leader, It comes back to my business of being not so guarded, but being a bit vulnerable yourself. We need to be role models in that, not in the sense that we sit there sobbing and everybody has to comfort us all the time, but in the sense that we actually own that we've made mistakes, that we haven't got it right. But let's look at what we can learn from this. Very, very important,
Yeah.
I would suggest. So I wouldn't chuck it all into straight away. I'd try to rebuild.
And yeah, I think it's time to move on. We'll get to some of these other questions later. Okay?
Okay, I will just change here we go. I think here we go, we're on to trust here. If we look then at this transition from a place of authority that's not so much about our position, but actually how we earn authority. In other words, people, when they engage with us, our teams, when they engage with us, they accord us an authority without necessarily it having to be exercised by us just because of virtue of our position. And it's what I was saying just now. The team leader has a key role in shaping the culture of the team. And where I put personal authentication here, basically I'm saying we need to be good role models. We need to be people that do what we say we're going to do. We need to be people that actually walk the talk in terms of the value and the pursuit of the vision of our team. And in that, being people who are approachable and accessible, not 10 feet above contradiction, not people on a pedestal, but people who actually, whether we're in offices, we have an open door policy, whether we are people that someone feels they can actually say, I'm struggling with this. So often I come across situations where people complain about they've given someone else a task to do and they don't do it very well. And they're not going to do this delegating thing anymore because it doesn't work. Very often that's because they have dumped something on somebody without really giving them an understanding of what it is they're expected to do. And going back to this whole thing of empowering people, we need to be people who are approachable and accessible and actually explain things, that are willing to answer questions, and they're there with people, not with breathing down their neck, but they're with them. Now, this whole thing of earned authority means, I would like to suggest, that we need quite strong influencing skills, because it's less about telling people what they have to do, it's trying to encourage them and facilitate them to do things themselves. It's less wagging our finger at people or giving people a set of instructions, and it's more trying to persuade them and influence them to take action. And for that, you do need trust and relationship, as we were talking about earlier. And one of the ways to build trust is for us as leaders to be what I call relentlessly consistent. That people know that when we say we will do something, we do it, that we will be accessible, that we will be those who actually follow through. Now, some of the pressure points of all of that are what do we do when the team don't see the same things the same way as we do, or they don't want to go in a particular direction that's actually quite important to us. As a former leader of an emerging church, a new church plant, I had a team working with me, and we shared in things together very closely. But as the main leader, pastor, perhaps would be a good way to describe it, very often I would have a sense of this is the way I think we really should be going as a church. And one of the most difficult things for me sometimes was to lay that out in front of the rest of the team and listen to them, ask me questions about it, and very nicely critique it and question it, and even say, I don't think we should go that way. And learning how to handle that with grace and humility, I have to say, was an uncomfortable thing. But actually, it did mean that what came out through that was that we together owned a way forward together. It is easier, isn't it, to direct people? So much easier than to try to persuade them. It's much easier to be more directive. And there are times when perhaps that is necessary, and the smart team leader is the person who knows when that is to be. Of course, in any team, and this is a whole seminar itself, I suspect, we will have individuals who have what are known as authority issues, who, whenever there's any authority, see that it's there to be challenged. And we may want to talk about that further, about how you deal with some of those more difficult situations. But I'm going to move us swiftly on to what I was talking about earlier, and that's that transition from task to community. And then perhaps we could open it up for some comments and questions. Traditionally, teams and the understanding of team working has been around, we have a task to do, this is the task, and we need to get on with it. And if actually relationship comes out of working together, well, that's a nice byproduct, but it's not essential. In the 21st century, I think many of us would like to argue and suggest that quite the opposite is the case, that team needs to be formed around a vision, and that we learn something of what it actually means to be team, and build a relational community. And out of that, we can do tasks so much more effectively. Within that, there's this whole thing of embracing a healthy accountability, so that if I don't do what I said I'm going to do, that does have implications for the team. Or so another person doesn't do what they say they're going to do, that has implications for the team. And that we're actually able to have a strong enough team with that trust to be able to say to one another that is difficult, and hold one another to account, not in a punitive way, but in a loving, gracious way. If you don't have a relational sense of engagement with one another, a sense of community, it's so much harder to do that. And things that need to be tackled so often then go ahead untackled. And you've got that quote of Lencioni about trust as the soil for community, as is vulnerability. It's about being comfortable with being open without filters all the time. It's about admitting the truth about ourselves. Trust is knowing that when a team member does push you, they're doing it because they care about the team, rather than just being pushy. And as team leaders, we need to be people that work to create team as a safe place, where things can be raised, but they're raised constructively, where they're raised in line with the values that we have agreed together as a team, so that together we can own things perhaps not as they are, and we need to move forward. That, again, I think, is that whole thing about trust as courage, trust needing courage. And it comes to that place of us being the role model, doesn't it? The team leader as the role model, actually modelling that ourselves. The whole learning thing, I think, is so important in that, and being willing to say that as a team we need to learn and grow in this area and own it. Christian context sometimes makes it a bit more difficult because of the high expectations we can have for one another. I'll bring this one to a close in a minute, but saying that in this country there's a large national event, thousands and thousands of Christians come to it every year, called Spring Harvest, and from over a number of years I've run seminars there on working with Christian organisations. And to be honest, you get two types of people there. One group are those who are very excited about they're going to work with a Christian organisation, and very starry-eyed, high expectations, think it's going to be much better than church, really excited about it. The other group are a very disillusioned group who have lots of struggles and issues about working in Christian organisations because they are so disillusioned with it. I think the ones who are content never come to the seminar. But you can see there that there's in Christian settings there can be all sorts of expectations that can cause issues for us. I'm going to stop talking here. I've put enough around these couple of subjects. Are there any questions or comments that we want to pick up?
Okay. Thank you, Fran, for sharing. It seems that picking up on the idea of trust and also moving from task to community, um, is that another way of thinking in terms of almost like a collaborative intelligence, to where in order for community to, or in order for a team to really find, I guess its greatest performing level and creativity, that the members have to, in some sense, come to a collaborative way that involves all these the different characteristics that you've just been highlighting for us.
I think you're absolutely right, because it's this thing of playing to one another's strengths, and if you don't know what one another's strengths are, it's quite hard to be collaborative, isn't it? So, I mean, there are a number of tools around for gaining insight into a person's strengths. Something that gets used a lot in this country, I don't know if in the States, it's called Myers-Briggs, which is it's a way of looking at how we tend to function as individuals, what our biases are in that. And there are a number of tools like that. And sometimes for teams, it can be really useful to get someone to come in and take us through some of that, and so that we can talk as individuals about, well, as I'm the sort of person that I don't like conflict, or I'm the sort of person who my strength is really in analysing things. I'm not so good on the touchy-feely stuff, and actually building that understanding of not just our skills, but what our biases in terms of behaviour, personalities, our characteristics, and then collaboration becomes so much easier, doesn't it? Because if I understand, Stan, that you're someone who actually is very comfortable sitting here in a webinar and picking up questions and dealing with them, then I know I can rely on you to do that in situations where I might not be quite so confident about it. But I could actually be someone that helps you in another way or works with you in another way. So that collaboration, I agree with you totally, really important. But you only do that on the basis of growing understanding of each other. And some of that comes from doing the task, if you like, but a lot of it comes from moving more to that place of being a bit more vulnerable with one another, and sometimes it being facilitated with the use of tools, such as I suggested.
Elizabeth makes a comment and then has a question. She writes, I resonate with her comment about strength lies in differences. So many feel that differences weaken us and diversity is scary. I feel the opposite. How will we ever learn to live peacefully if we can't learn from each other? Would you?
Absolutely. And I agree very much with Elizabeth there. And I think just to build on that a little bit, it's what I'm meaning about a learning culture. If we we have our overarching goal, if you like, what our team is there for, our vision, whatever we want to describe it as, and our values. This is how we all behave together. This is what team looks like for us in this season together as a team, and we agree that together. Spend time actually agreeing that. Then it's easier to live with one another's differences if we build into that. And if we build learning into that as an ongoing thing, I think that can be very exciting because the team grows and develops. One of the best things, I have to say, is a really good team. I can think of a team I was on up until recently that it was such fun and it was highly productive, but we laughed together and we supported one another and we knew who was good at certain things and we looked out for one another. It was great. It was hard work though, because it took investment.
There's a kind of the I guess an older idea. It's been around since the 1960s by Bruce Tuckman, that teams go through forming, storming, norming, and performing. Yeah. What happens, and I think we've kind of been touching on this, but what happens if a team gets stuck in that storming phase to where, they just can't move beyond the individual self and what they're what they're trying to vie for in terms of position, power, and whatever else within the group, influence. What do you do as a leader when you have that kind of storming that continues to take place within a group?
I think that's really difficult, Stan, because it really depends on why that is happening. And there can be all sorts of reasons for that. If there's an individual who actually feels they should be leader of the team, and they have an understanding of leadership, which is very much about dominance and control, as opposed to what I'm trying to suggest, that leadership is far more of a servant leadership type of humility, of empowering, of authority that is earned rather than positional, of focusing on building relationship, then you can take them to a side, have a conversation with them. We can actually, if it feels like the right thing to do, actually open up a discussion in the team meeting about how the team is functioning. Maybe take a step back and rather than tackle the individual, acknowledge in a team meeting and create space and time for this, that actually conflict is a reality in teams. And conflict is not necessarily a bad thing, it can be a constructive thing. Let's talk together about how as a team we believe we should handle conflict. How should we go about dealing with conflict as a team? And again, if I go back to my friend Lencioni, he talks a lot about that storming stage where there is conflict, and actually healthy, effective teams learn how to handle conflict. And rather than focusing on the person that's the problem, sometimes it's good to take a step back and look at how we corporately, jointly, community-wise, as a team, will engage with conflict. How can we handle it well? How can we disagree well?
I'm going to let you resume your sharing your ideas, and I'll step away for a while.
Okay. Another transition or shift, if you like, for us as leaders is this one of moving from directing to empowering, where we move from being a director to being a coach or a mentor or a facilitator. Someone who actually invests in the lives of the team. And part of that is by actually asking good questions. Now, we have a brilliant role model in the person of Jesus, don't we, in that, who asked such searching questions of his disciples. It really made them think. You see it time and again. And the parables being another form of that, trying to help them get beyond the superficial to really understand the dynamics of what was going on and what he was teaching. And good questions often will help us to face the assumptions that we have and help us again with learning. And this whole thing of being someone who rather would empower people in our teams, that means that we have to be open to experimenting and improvising. Having led a church for 10 years that started from scratch, there was an awful lot of experimenting we did, and to be honest, we made some mistakes. Some things went well, and some things didn't. And this whole thing of relying on the team meant that sometimes you were improvising at the last minute because it wasn't always quite as slick or as not the right word, but as organised as maybe if I'd been in control, I would have wanted it. And so, empowering carries risks. It involves seeing opportunities in the midst of uncertainty, but it also involves living with fragility. And that is so not us as leaders, many of us, that we like certainty, we like things predictable, we like to know what's going to happen. Instead, this type of leadership in our volatile world, working with a team, relying on one another, having that mutual interdependence and accountability means that sometimes things will be fragile. It means that sometimes we have to live with contradictions, and as Christians, maybe we should be good at that anyway, because we constantly live with contradictions. The Bible itself is full of paradox and complexities with no immediate answers. And so perhaps maybe we are better placed than some to do that. But I have to say, I'm someone who's 100% committed to this business of empowering those I work with. But sometimes I really do struggle with it. It's so much easier to do things yourself, so much easier to be in control. But we can learn through crises and things not going so well, and the challenge of the unexpected. And as long as we don't make that mistake of dumping things on people rather than empowering people is making sure that people understand why we're doing what we're doing, and giving them the tools they need for the how, rather than dictating how the how has to happen necessarily. I'm just going to do one more of these, and then we can open it up again. The transition from focusing on the destination to the importance of the journey together. Not saying that we shouldn't have a particular end in mind, a particular goal, a particular vision, a particular target, whatever it is. But what this suggests is that actually the going together to achieve it is very, very important. Excuse me, I just need to find a piece of paper here. Here it is. The journeying together means that actually we can learn together and actually achieve more. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go well, go together. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go well, go together. And so the leader's role in focusing on the journey as well as the destination is about ensuring that there's space created for people to dream about what that journey might look like. For people to dream, indeed, about the destination as well. And it does mean a far more emphasis on co-creating the way forward, rather than us as leaders saying, this is where we're going, this is how we're going to get there, please follow me. And if you don't want to, well then, obviously, perhaps you shouldn't be part of this team. This is far more about collaboration, co-creation, dreaming together, journeying together. And therefore, having shared values and articulating those values, and having worked through what those values might look like in practice, as well as vision, becomes very, very important. Envisioning and dreaming what the future might be before setting objectives and strategies becomes much more important in this way of doing things. I mean, the leader's role, obviously, is to build that sense of shared mission, and the challenge in that is achieving commitment by everyone to it. It takes you back to what Stan was talking about just now in terms of the different stages of teams, and the storming stage where people are trying to work things through and they tussle with one another before they come through to that stage of performing and actually working well. That's often that stage is where that commitment is achieved. In it together through the tough times as well. You know, Oprah Winfrey, I've got this quote from Oprah Winfrey. She says, lots of people want to ride with you in the limo, but what you want is someone who will take the bus with you when the limo breaks down. And it's that sort of being together in the tough times as well as the good times, which demonstrates that we are committed to this. And common language being very important in that, and taking time on that journey to celebrate, celebrate achievements, to celebrate progress, symbols, whether that's pictures on the wall or charts or a bunch of flowers or whatever it is that actually say we're at this stage of the journey. Being unafraid of disturbance. It's a stagnant pond needs stirring up, doesn't it? Disturbance brings life. And people sometimes will be disturbers in our group. The situations will change. But that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing on the journey. It can actually stir us and stimulate us and refocus us. And of course, the whole thing of listening to God together. I'm an activist. I love to see things get done. I love to get in there. I'm very involved in my local community, in community regeneration, in the inner city where I live, dealing with the local public authorities and working with people in some of the poorest areas of the inner city. I'm an activist, and sometimes the hardest thing is to stop and take space to listen to God and to do that together. Team leader, an effective team leader who wants an effective team, who focuses not just on the destination, the goal of the team, but on the journey the team makes, will be one that ensures that we take time to listen to that together. And the leader's position, if you like, in this moves from being the tour guide to the fellow traveller. Is the person who sometimes is the journey guide, but actually is mainly the fellow traveller. We travel together. In this, you have questions about what does success look like, and measuring success and focusing on success, and some of our common understandings of success perhaps need to change as we look at those staging posts where we actually celebrate the journey as well as celebrating the progress towards the destination. Above all, though, in the destination to journey, don't forget that there is a destination. Some of us can start to enjoy the journey so much that we lose our way a little bit. So don't forget the purpose of the journey. Do enjoy it, do get immersed in it, but don't forget the purpose of it. Stan, I'm going to come back to you now. Perhaps we could take some more questions and comments. We seem to have some glitches.
Stan, you need to unmute your mic again, please.
I'm sorry, I'm the glitch. We had a couple questions. I'd just like to make sure we got that one comment. You mentioned earlier, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go well, go with others. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, that's right. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go well, go together. It's an African proverb.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure we caught that.
A lot of wisdom.
Yeah, book of wisdom there. Jeremy has a question earlier oh, here it is. It kind of goes back to that working as a team. And his question is how would one facilitate constructive conflict for teams made up of conflict avoidant members?
How long have you got? Quite a question. I think we do need to recognise that comfort levels do vary hugely, don't they, with conflict, and they can differ radically based on our culture. You know, if you come from one part of the world, it's a bad thing to get into overt conflict. It's to do with our family backgrounds, our temperaments, and we need to. One of the things I think helps us is to understand how each other feels about conflict. So to move away from a particular situation, but it's what I was talking about earlier, about this whole thing of talking about conflict. Because for many people, I think for many Christians in particular, conflict is a bad word. Conflict is a bad thing. It's a negative thing. Whereas in fact, we see in the scriptures that conflict between people occurred, and it was not necessarily a destructive thing. And we need to start talking with people about how we handle disagreement. Let's stop talking about conflict, because that's a word that some people find very difficult to talk about. Let's talk about, well, we're not always going to agree. Let's talk about how we might handle not agreeing. And again, to lift that out from the individual and talk about, we're here for a common cause. We all want this, whatever this is, don't we? We want to work towards it. We will see things differently. Let's talk about how we can actually deal with the seeing things differently so we can move forward into pursuing that common cause. So I think if we can depersonalize it, I think if we can generalize it in the sense of handling disagreements and around issues, rather than interpersonal, this is about me disagreeing with you, is to acknowledge we won't always agree. So how can we handle this? I've done that with teams and it works very well. Very often with a flip chart, rather than sitting around looking at one another, very often with a flip chart where you're asking people to comment and it goes up. Oh, sorry, I'm waving now. The camera goes up on the flip chart. That somehow takes the sting out of it because we're all looking together. We're all working together on the task of talking about conflict or disagreement. But anything that depersonalizes it takes the spotlight away from individuals. Another way is when I was talking about doing some work on our own personality profiles and growing in understanding of that and using some of these tools that are available, there are tools related to those that are about what are called conflict profiles, about understanding how each of us as an individual deals with conflict. If we have that understanding, that would help enormously, I think.
Yeah. Some teams have spent quite a bit of time using those profiles, those conflict communication profiles, to work at understanding within the team. The one thing too is Jeremy, a different Jeremy, writes, yes, depersonalize, and then he says he's got folks who like to make it personal. They like to triangulate gossip, and so forth.
Yeah.
It seems like if we stay in conflict, if we seem to continue to work at it in terms of a problem-solving approach, versus getting at what are our core assets of a group. Like even how can we agree to disagree is really getting at one of those things of how is it that we pull out our best practices, our best strengths, our core identities, and it's like the questions we ask take us in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things about a common language is storytelling and the staging process I talk about. So important to create room in our team life together to tell stories of what's gone well, to tell stories of things that we have learned. Because in so doing, it takes us away very often from the very personal in terms of our disagreement. And I think that's really important, as well as you're saying about, well, what are the assets we've got as a team? What are the things that we can really build on here, rather than focusing on what we don't have or what someone isn't doing right, is really focusing on what we do have and seeing how together we can build. These things sound great in a seminar like this. It's so much harder to do in practice, I think. And team culture is a huge subject in itself, and how we build positive culture. I would suggest that actually it's worth talking collectively about team culture, not in the sense, again, pointing the finger, but actually saying, as we move forward into this next season of the team, what are the things that we would want others to describe us as? What would we want others to characterize us as? What are our aspirations for this team in terms of our values? And again, I'm a great believer in flip charts. If we get it up there, and there's something there about holding one another accountable to that, rather than the team leader saying, we've got to be like this.
It's like how can we move the group off of blaming each other and just accepting this is where we're at today. Otherwise, we stay stuck. You mentioned earlier about success and enjoying the journey and never not really focusing in on the destination. How difficult or how difficult is it for churches, communities of faith, to become really prioritized on the journey, so that we even lose the taste or even that we don't even like to talk about success?
Um, I think as churches, it's good to celebrate, and it's so. I think we have a language for that, which is about celebrating God's goodness to us, celebrating the coming of His kingdom, celebrating. So it's not so much um, for us as Christians. I think we get tangled up in humility, don't we?
Yeah.
And success is not a word that is possibly a word that we're comfortable with, but we can celebrate. I think God's goodness, and we can celebrate when things go well, and stand with one another when things don't go so well. It's that balance of actually acknowledging when things don't go so well, and standing with one another and owning it together, but also this thing of um, what's the best way to describe? We need to encourage one another, and I think celebration is part of that. So I think in terms of success, one of the certainly as someone who's been involved in church planting, sometimes success is seen in numbers, of people sitting there in the church, the numbers of conversions. Success is about size and scale, um, and we need to also, I think we need to learn to celebrate success, which is about faithfulness, which is about people's lives being changed, which is about trust growing. It's some of these things as well, I think, rather than um, we are successful in a team because we've achieved scale and volume.
Yeah. Let's take just a quick break, Fran, and invite Anton to come in and share information about the continuing education units for people, and then also for the survey that we take towards the end of the webinar.
Okay.
Anton?
Thanks, Stan. Thanks, Fran. I simply wanted to invite people to have the polls at the end to help us evaluate how the content was. And Fran, before I get too wound up into concluding things, do you still have a few PowerPoints to share with us, or are you towards the end of your...
I just have one more to go, which is really a couple of quotes.
Good. We'll make sure we save time for that.
Okay.
And so I'll have this evaluation up, but I want Fran to have a chance to conclude. For those of you that wish to have the continuing education units, I'll put that up after Fran has the chance to share her last slide. And so actually I'll move us back to where Fran can share that last slide and give us the last content, and then I'll bring us back to this poll for those of you that have not had the chance yet. So Fran, back to you.
Okay. Just the last slide. A couple of quotes from different parts of the world, which is really to remind us that the key to this is how as leaders we live and behave. That it's not just what we say, but it's how we live and what we do. A well-known quote from Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. And then from China, not the cry but the flight of the wild duck leads the flock to fly and follow. And both of these, I think, really stressing that our behaviours, our lifestyles, our actions as leaders are actually key in all of this if we're to build effective teams. And just to remind us that a lot of this is about looking at ways in which we can build relational teams where there is a climate of trust, there's a climate of challenge and stretch, but there's enjoyment in actually journeying together, taking things forward. And for us as team leaders, it involves taking risks in trusting others to do things, of sharing responsibility, of fostering collaboration, and of being those that are prepared not to have all the answers, that are prepared to be vulnerable, that are prepared to share our lives with people as we expect them to share them with us. I hope you found some of this stimulating and encouraging. I feel very much that I'm on a journey with this, and I do wish you well, and may you know God's good grace and wisdom as you carry on this journey as well. Thank you.
Fran, thank you, and stay with us. We do still have a couple questions. One is there is a request to see if you'd be willing to share your PowerPoint and make that available. Um,
Yes, of
okay, and we'll
course.
make sure that gets passed along. And then Vicky has a question. She says that in her place of employment, the conflict center, people are always surprised what a great place it is to work. We keep working to change the perception about conflict. It is inevitable, but violence, physical, verbal, emotional, is not. My question is, how does one work on a team where the leadership is struggling with these concepts?
Yeah, that's a very tricky one, Vicky, about how you influence a team. I, as a team member rather than as a team leader, and trying to influence the team leaders. I think some of it is in modelling it yourself in terms of how you handle conflict. Um, some of it is in conversations with those team leaders about um, disagreements that have taken place. But I think it's a very difficult. It's managing your manager, managing your team leaders, influencing your team leaders. Very difficult thing. Um, it depends on your relationship with your team leader, I think, as much as anything. Um, and the reality is that some team leaders are very poor at dealing with conflict. It gets pushed under the carpet every time, and then it pops up in the most unlikely and destructive places as a result. I as a team member dealing with a team leader, again, a lot of this can, I think, only be dealt with through relationship, having a coffee. But of course, if they're threatened as a person, they're not good at trusting their team, then that is a very, very difficult place. I would resort to prayer personally, and because I think there are some situations where you, as a team member, can't change things. Sorry to be discouraging in that.
Well, I think it's reality that teamwork is hard work. Uh,
Mm.
because you have all those, you have a number of personalities involved there, and in terms of us, God is working through that. You may one thing you started earlier in the webcast. You talked about leadership, creating that culture. Uh, what what do you see as some of the key aspects of what the leader needs to do in terms to personally influence the changing, to, in a sense, to creating a culture, a healthy team culture within the context of a team? I know you were touching on that, but if you could say these are really.
Okay. Creating a healthy team culture. One is making sure there is the space and actively facilitating. This is not passive, it's active facilitating. Identifying what are the values of the team and what will that look like in practice. Secondly, I think it's about modeling things yourself. So rather than this just being aspiration, it's actually demonstrating through the way that you behave and your accessibility, etc., your empowering, your vulnerability, your sharing in the journey, etc. That's another way of influencing team culture. Another one is through investing in building relationships, actually getting to know people and affirming them in their strengths and helping them discover their strengths and trusting them, giving them opportunity to have a go, not blaming them when they get it wrong, but acknowledging together when they've got it wrong. Let's look at how we could do this differently next time round, and giving them another chance. And so it's about investing into people as well. It's making explicit together what we believe team culture should be, and checking the temperature occasionally, not every meeting, but just occasionally, whether that's 6 monthly or annually, in terms of how is this going? How are we doing on this? We said we wanted to be like this. How do we think we're doing? Where could we tweak things? Where do we need to grow and build on from where we are?
It
things like
It,
that.
it seems like one of the roles of the leader is to really neutralize those obstacles or the roadblocks for both the individuals of the team and the larger team itself.
Yes, yes,
So yeah,
yeah.
uh,
No, I would agree with that.
just want to make sure. Gary shares a very good presentation, many helpful comments, and reminders of team efforts that help so much in healthy relationships as we mature in the body of Jesus here and waiting on his soon return. Thank you. Thank you, Gary. We want to thank everyone for sharing this afternoon and this evening. And Fran, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. Uh, I really feel for you because you had to narrow this down to an hour and a half. This is like days long, but this is a subject that can go for days. It's not just an hour long, and so I really give you credit for doing a splendid job of focusing the content for us, and I think very helpful information. So, is there anything, Fran, that you would
Well, thank you for having
Oh,
me.
it's been a delight. It really has been a delight. Is there anything that you would like to say as we close off our webcast?
What I do want to say is that I think team is potentially a wonderful thing, and I would encourage you to have courage to keep pursuing the building and the strengthening of team wherever you are. You will be that much richer as a result. And certainly in God's economy, team and the people of God again and again is the way in which he seems to do things, not just through the rugged individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, Fran, thank you so much. We invite you to just stick around for a few minutes, and
Okay.
I'll have a conversation with you, and we'll still take some questions as people are taking care of their CEUs and departing. Thank you, Terry, for joining us. You have a nice day as well. Um, Talk about playfulness within the team a little more, and how that is so important for generative thinking.
Oh yes, um, yeah. Well, I think there are several ways of doing that, aren't there? I mean, one is when you're sitting around in a team meeting, and you can. There are all sorts of things that one can do to stimulate generative thinking that can be very light-hearted. But I'd like to take us out of the meeting room and get us doing things like walking together and sharing as we walk, the eating of meals together, the trying to think of some things that we've done, going on prayer walks together, um, and things that actually make us laugh, learning about each other's sense of humour and how ideas are sparked through humour. Um, this whole thing of having fun together. One of the problems with teams, though, is that one person's fun or playfulness is not necessarily
Yeah.
another's, and we're all different in that. And part of the learning in that is learning to appreciate the different ways in which we relax and the creative juices flow. And I think that is part of the learning, actually, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what sort of things have you done in the past, then, Stan, that has helped that?
Well, in it with the church group, we've done creative thinking around Bible stories, those kind of things. I've
Yes.
done the walking. Also have done creative imaging with that as well. Even perhaps starting like with
Yes.
animal or bird personalities, or even some kind of other object as a way of getting the creative juices going, that kind of thing. So, and
We have a game called Pass the
oh
Duck,
yeah, yeah,
and the duck was a carved wooden duck, and you pass it around the group and play some music, a bit like musical chairs or pass the parcel. Play some music. When the duck stops with you, you then pick a card, and it has a picture on it, and one picture would be showing you a question. If you ruled the world, if I ruled the world, I would, and then you have to say what you would do. There are other questions, quite humorous questions, but all about unpacking one's thinking about issues and world situations or local situations, but it's done in a very humorous way, like a pass the parcel way, and it works extremely well. The things you learn about people as well in that, in a very light-hearted way. Silly games like that we've played as teens, and indeed in church situations as well.
Yeah, I've also used pictures, cartoons, those kind of things. And then another thing I've had them do is just craft work, like building towers made out of different materials, and to see how creative they are, and also teamwork. Building collaborative work. So.
And things that we've done things like helps you understand a person very much, and they're quite personal. Things like psalm writing, actually giving people, taking a psalm, giving them a framework, and then people to add their own words, if you like, of thanks, of lament, of all of those sorts of things. And you find that out of that comes some very personal, some very moving insights into where people are, and where people are crafting these together, crafting a team prayer or a team psalm or something like that. That I think fosters quite a lot of heartfelt understanding.
Yeah. Well, we recognize for everyone that it's after 9 o'clock in London, and here on the East Coast of the United States, it's now after 5, and wherever you're at, we've been on for an hour and a half. And I just want to thank everyone that has remained with us following in this conversation. We appreciate your presence, your participation, and your support for this ministry. And Fran, thank you so much for wonderful content. I've enjoyed having this conversation with you, and just really appreciate, and just want to say thanks again. And to Anton, your work in the background is just wonderful, and we would not be able to do this without you. Anton, are there any last instructions that you have for us as we